Hi, I'm Tony Russo from On Death Care, and this is The Rest, a roundup of funeral industry news for the week ending Friday, March 13th, 2026. We've got a bunch of cool stories this week I'm going to go over, and I'm going to start with one of the stories that I published on my newsletter, On Death Care. If you've not subscribed to On Death Care, the newsletter, I'd love it if you did. It is free to subscribe, and I send out stories as I finish them and as I report on them. I do have a special Sunday edition that I send out to paid subscribers with a preview of what is in the week to come, but all of the rest of my stories and the podcasts are free because I want to have a serious conversation about what's happening, in death care, and that's only possible if everybody can have access to the same information. So the story this week was about funeral professionals, peer support, kind of. It's really about, is it about mental health? Maybe about mental health and maybe a little bit about the retention crisis. I started by thinking about the phrase, do what you love and you'll never work a day in your life. That's dumb. I mean, I'm not a huge fan of aphorisms to begin with, and dumb aphorisms I'm definitely not a fan of. And, the person that said that, never had to get up, at 4:00 in the morning and go out in the snow and pick up a body at an accident scene. It's not the kind of thing that a person loves. And I think it's probably a bad way to think about it. And speaking with Michael, who has been working with funeral directors on mental health issues funeral professionals, peer support is, I think, a decade old. It might be a little bit older. I think it was informal first. And his concern is that increasingly people are leaving the industry after a decade. And now a decade is a long time to devote to something and then give up on it. And he suspects that it has to do with this disconnect between what funeral directors expect of themselves and what is expected of them by either their employees or their peers or the people at large. And I think that he's got a point. What his concern is that there's a lack of access to qualified therapists. And for them, and I think for many people in funeral service, qualified therapist doesn't mean, that they have a degree, but he's particularly interested in making sure that funeral directors have access to people who are either former funeral directors or people who are, in the, emergency medical service or were emergency responders. He talks about his therapist is a former, Ottawa detective. People who have these kind of careers that require more of them professionally than, more emotionally professionally, if you get my meaning, than normal quote unquote jobs. And he feels like this is an important aspect of retention is providing this kind of access. And I don't necessarily disagree with him. And he doesn't know for sure. That's why he's doing this survey. So the funeral professional peer support folks have put out this survey. There is a link in the show notes. There's a link in the story. And I'll probably just share random links on social media. I've seen other people sharing the links on social media. They want to get a baseline to see if what they think is true. And if it's not true, they want to see what is true, because they recognize that the number of people who are giving up after 10 years, it's too high. And I love what I do. I love what I do so much. But I would not say that I never worked a day in my life because of it. I think of it in terms of cost. Like, if you want to do this, you love doing this, there is a price that you have to pay to do what you love. And I think that that's a fact. And I think that if you begrudge the price, then that's where you can get into trouble. And I am talking all the way out of school here, but I'd like you to at least think about this, especially if you are a funeral director who's struggling with whether or not you want to continue on in the profession, or if you are just, really, fighting against burnout, and maybe you are trapped in this kind of wheel of, you never work a day in your life if you love what you do, and maybe you feel like there's something the matter because you love what you do, but you feel like you're working every day of your life. Um, what I'd like to suggest is it possible that going to therapy is the price that you pay for getting to be a funeral director, like taking that part seriously? And one of the things that Michael also pointed out in his in the interview that we did with him is that he thinks that people are nervous about going to therapy in front of their bosses, which is, I mean, for me, it seems like an old school thing, but funeral directors are nothing if not kind of old school. So I don't I don't understand it, but I get that it may happen. And so his hope is to be able to offer, more private therapy. Not that therapy is not private, but as he points out, if you work if you work in a funeral home and there are 5 funeral directors, then and one of them has to go see the therapist, at 2 o'clock every Thursday, that's not a good way to keep that to yourself. If it's something that you want to keep to yourself, I don't know if that's important anymore. I'm not calling anybody out who's not comfortable sharing that they go to therapy, but it feels like something that, you know, we as a society really should be trying to be more comfortable with for those of us that aren't. Um, and I would just like to leave you with that. I want you to think about whether or not it is the price, whether therapy is the cost. I wrote something that I felt was very clever in my story, so I want to read it to you. I said here that maybe being in therapy is the price of being a funeral director, plain and simple. Maybe the cost of getting to bear the burdens that you do is that you have to learn to share them. So I would love to know what you think about this, and please feel free to email me if you don't if you don't want to comment publicly, which I understand. You can shoot me an email at bytonyrusso@gmail.com, and I will get it and I will respond, and I will keep it under my hat unless you want me to share it, which I'll also do. Now, here's the rest. Before we get to the weekly rundown, I want to make sure you've listened to the last podcast. You're listening to this podcast, you probably listened to the last one, but there has been commentary upon commentary on the recent Consumer Disposition Preferences survey that was published by CANA in conjunction with Wake Forest Law. Now, the cremation paradox is something that we talked about last week, but there have been more insights provided by more people. And I think that the reason for that is that they're reading the data. And so I just want to encourage you to do it. I want to encourage you to, again, check the link in the show notes and go and download this report. One of the fun things to do, and genuinely fun things to do, is to throw it into AI. I'm a Gemini guy. I really like Gemini, and I also really like Notebook ML. And I might have some news about that next week. But for this week, you throw it into Gemini, you can ask it all sorts of questions, and it'll tell you what the report says. You can get it to crunch numbers and recrunch numbers, and not just for sport, although I'm not going to lie, there's a novelty to it at first. But one of the things that eventually I think you can come to see is that what's true nationwide might not be true for you specifically, but what's true nationwide might give you insights to ways that you can improve your own business or your own approach to helping families locally, even if your own jurisdiction doesn't necessarily jibe with everything that's in there. There are new ways to think about questions in there. And that, I think, is the main value of this report. So this is the third week in a row I've mentioned the report. It will be the last week I mentioned the report, but I wanted to give everybody one last chance. I want to welcome all my new listeners, by the way. Thank you very much. We had a nice little bump last week, and it's been a pleasure to see you guys continue to find me. That makes me very happy and a little bit, proud. So thank you. Earlier this week, I shared a story about what appears to be an incredible debt owed to the Milwaukee County Medical Examiner by a combination of 18 funeral homes. The total bill is $1.3 million. One of those funeral homes owes $500,000, and the rest are broken up in increments of plus or minus, whatever, $25,000 each, and sometimes a little bit more. Because of this debt, they have decided that if you owe the county medical examiner more than $25,000, you don't have credit with them anymore, and you have to pay as you go until the debt is paid off. These seem like big, weird numbers, and so that's why I called the medical examiner to look into it. And I spoke with a man named Tim Shabo, and as it turns out, they weren't keeping records of what was going on between the medical examiner and the funeral home before January 1st, 2020. I'll take everyone at their word. I find it very difficult to believe that in the 21st century, it didn't occur to anybody to establish computer records about what was going on in the medical examiner's office as far as bills owed to them. But there's something even weirder than what I found, and I found some weird stuff. There's a link to the whole story in the show notes. I just want to tell you what happened with the 1.3 million, but if you want to hear about the murders and betrayals and political intrigue and racial overtones, you'll have to read the story in the in the show notes. So, as it turns out, it costs about $1,000 to have a cremation through the medical examiner's office. It costs almost $400 for the cremation permit, which everybody needs, and it costs about $200 for the death certificate, $168 and change. Now, if you need transport, that's another $250. And if you need transport, it's $168. If you need a specialized body bag, that's $250. So you can run up a bill very, very, very quickly. And there was a small Senate call for an investigation, and there may still be one, but I don't know if it's going to be necessary anymore. And what the local legislator was looking for was what was happening to this money, because these are cash advances. These aren't like, well, they're waiting for the bill to get paid, and that's why the coroner isn't getting paid. These are upfront expenses, one would imagine. And so before they really got a big investigation underway, one of the local funeral directors stepped up and said, "Well, most of the money that I owe, he didn't say me. I want to take that back. That was the impression I got. What he said was many people who have not paid the coroner yet are waiting to get paid by the state. So when someone is impoverished, they can apply through the funeral director to the state for relief. And if the state approves it, they send the funeral directors the money, and the funeral directors then pay their bill." And one of the other funeral directors pointed out that, when you're talking about at a minimum, $600, $550 per cremation, you can get to $25,000 pretty quickly. And again, I mentioned 2020. During COVID, you can get to $25,000 very, very, very quickly when you're doing the kind of work that was being done for those 2 years, 18 months, whatever we're going to call that. So the short version of the story is that there's no there's no real malfeasance, although I'm wondering if, and this is speculation, but I'm wondering if people maybe applied to the state for relief because they were impoverished and maybe the state declined them and they still didn't have the money for the cremation, but the cremation is already done and the permit has already been issued. And I wonder if that's what happened to the records from before 2020. Whenever something weird like that happens, it's not untoward to let your mind go a little conspiratorial. But hopefully more information will come out. I'll keep my eyes out and see if there's anything else to be learned from this story. But please read the feature that I wrote. There's a link in the show notes. Speaking of not paying your bills, or maybe I guess this is not getting your bills paid, a Connecticut state representative, her name is Tammy Nuccio, has introduced a bill that will establish a funeral service compensation account to aid victims of funeral care fraud. This is on the heels of they had a major scandal. But I mean, at this point, we're running out of states that haven't had major fraud scandals recently. And, I was being obnoxious when I posted this earlier. I called it too sleazy to fail. And it's weird to think of, what should be a pretty well-regulated, insurance aspect of the industry that is very easy to beat, and so I put it out there, and maybe you're one of the people who responded. I hope that you are, asking, what everybody thought of this. And this isn't uncommon. If you don't know that it's not uncommon, now you do. And I was told that in Wisconsin, for example, although the medical examiner might not know for sure where the money is. But in Wisconsin, they have a very similar program, and they fund it with fines and with other fees that cover this that would cover fraud. And it's a sin. It's a sin that this is the kind of thing that's necessary for this kind of industry. But bad actors are everywhere. But anyway, there's a link to that story in the show notes. The Return Home documentary, which is called The Life We Leave, has been picked up for distribution. It will premiere. It will be shown at South by Southwest. I don't know if it's out already or not. That's why I'm not sure if it's like the quote premiere or not. I am a huge fan of natural organic reduction. I think that, and I say it pretty much every time I bring it up, I think that it does more to promote the idea of choice than it does to make people actually have natural organic reduction. It remains a novelty, and it remains something that's very, very difficult to access. In the consumer preference report that I referenced earlier, it's like 2% of respondents were even listed it as number one. And people who didn't list it as number one listed it way far down the list. So, I mean, it is new and it is scary and it is confusing, but it is great for green burial in general because it makes people, one of the things that we talked about already, I guess, last week was that people conflate all forms of, not in a casket with a priest in the ground. Everything else seems like green burial to them. And that's something that, as an industry, certainly there's an education gap that needs to be addressed. But I'm excited for the documentary, and I hope it does well, and I wish them well with the art. There is another NOR story which is not nearly as happy, and it's also a little baffling. There is a place in California, it's the San Joaquin Valley, I think, the San Joaquin River, where Earth Funerals has been putting human compost as part of a restoration effort, and people are furious. And I don't necessarily blame them. I don't have any patience for people who are afraid of like chemical poisoning and stuff like that. I actually had the privilege of just getting a little note from someone who knows about this thing, and it's like the poison's not the problem. The problem is that it's not legal yet in California. Now, it raises the question, if it's not legal to have it done in California, but does that mean it's not legal to spread the compost? And because this is really kind of a thing unto itself. This is not, pulverized bone. This is dirt that used to be people. And it's interesting. I don't know what makes it illegal. I know it's illegal to be human composted, but I don't know if I wonder if you need to expressly say it is illegal to spread human compost on public land. I mean, it is clearly what I said in my reporting on it is, what I wonder is like, all right, so what's the ticket say, right? Whenever somebody says something's illegal, I'm like, okay, well, what do you write on the ticket? Is it really body mishandling? Is this a body mishandling case? If it is a body mishandling case, then why did they just say stop, please, instead of putting people in jail or issuing fines or things like that? So this is an area that's too gray already, and I think this muddies the waters a little bit. But I've reached out. I'll reach out again this month. This week was a little nutty. I didn't check everything off my list, and this was on my list. But once I did that Milwaukee thing, I frankly was all the way out of gas. But I've got some great stuff coming up next week, and hopefully I'll get to add this story to it. And that will do me kind of for this week. I would like to announce that I have opened another section of the newsletter. I am calling it the Doula Desk. I like to talk to death doulas. I like to write stories about them. End-of-life doulas. I like to use it interchangeably because it's one of those things that some people like one, some people like the other. I don't have a strong preference. But if you are a funeral director, if you're in the funeral industry, it is worth knowing, I think, about what is going on with the end-of-life doula movement and some of the things they're doing. I read a fantastic book written by a death doula this week. I'm going to have my review of that out next week, and that's also going to be on the Doula Desk section of the website. The reason I call it a section is you can subscribe to it and you'll get all the stories, but I'm not going to send you guys all the stories because in my experience, sometimes people get a little head up about getting a doula report in a funeral industry newsletter. And I don't want to alienate anybody. So if you want to get both newsletters, you can. If you want to just get one, you can. They are still free. And so there is a link to that story in the show notes. So that'll do me for this week. Please subscribe wherever you're listening now. If you've not subscribed to On Death Care, it's something I would really like you to consider. And I like to save this to the end because I don't want to make this too commercially, but this also is my job. One of the prices of doing my job is I have to occasionally ask for money. So if you would like to subscribe and have a paid subscription, I would genuinely appreciate it. We have 2 levels of support. They're not really hardcore differentiated. But if you are a funeral professional and you get value out of this, I think it would be cool if you decided to pay for it. I know that there are a lot of funeral directors who just don't have the whatever. It's like $100, $96 a year or something, who don't have it to spend. And I don't want to ask that of them. But if you do have it and you do find yourself reading this and you do find yourself getting, entertainment or knowledge, if you like getting it and you have the $100 lying around, I would love to get some material support from you. And thank you so much to all of you who have already chipped in. I genuinely appreciate it. It gets me up in the morning. And that will do me for this week. And I will see you next time with the rest.